Hello, welcome to the Naftiko Capabilities podcast. My name is Ken Lane. I'm the Chief Community Officer for Naftiko, but you might also know me as the API Evangelist, where I've been talking about the technology, business, and politics of APIs since 2010. This is my podcast. We're 3 to 4 weeks in, so I don't think I need to talk about it being new anymore, but I'm producing two of them a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, and trying to keep them to about 15 to 20 minutes. But let's dive in. This is another one of those episodes where it's just one guest and one topic. I sat down with my friend and blogger and creator and just all around interesting personality, Anil Dash. I've known him, I don't know, he's always been there. He's always been part of the web and the blogosphere and kind of that, what I would consider that first wave in this century. And but more recently, he created Glitch, which is a really interesting coding and collaboration platform. It got acquired by Fastly, and then now Anil's back to blogging and kind of back to his roots, doing what he's done for years. So he had published a blog post on Markdown that I thought was an interesting kind of history and explainer of Markdown because he was there in the beginning, but also kind of what it's become as this ubiquitous format that is everywhere. So I sat down with Anil and I asked him, "What is Markdown?"
At the simplest level, Markdown is a format for a plain text file, which, there's a lot of precedent going back many, many years, which is sort of just the convention a lot of people follow. If you want to do a bulleted list, you put an asterisk at the beginning of the line, and then you put your text after it. And, what John Gruber did was sort of recognize, one, that that's a behavior that people have, and two, that that was how he liked to write his blog posts, and then, made a little, basically a Perl script that would take that and in a consistent way transform that into HTML markup for his blog. And he made that a plugin for a content management system called Movable Type, which I was the product manager for, back in the day. We're going back now at this point 25 years ago, which is, I'm starting to feel, the age of saying that. But it was kind of the WordPress of its time, and it's hard to remember how small the internet was back then. But at that time, it was sort of to be a little immodest, it was kind of the entirety of like influencer media and social media. It was, if you took all of WordPress and all of Substack and kind of all of the influencers on even YouTube and stuff, all those things didn't exist that are Instagram. Everybody who wanted to have a presence online as an individual and have a voice online was on that platform.
Yeah.
And so that was a super, super influential platform. And John had recognized that because a lot of those other folks weren't very technical, the easier you could make it to make rich formatting and not just bullet points, but bold, italics, and links and images without having to learn HTML and without the risk of breaking the formatting of your site, the more powerful it was going to be. And my personal lens on it was, this is again one of those things that tells you how long ago it was. There was no such field or practice in the industry as developer relations or developer experience. I had that role, but there wasn't a title for it. And so I was creating, what would today be called sort of a developer platform or whatever. And it was really part of me launching our ability to have plugins. And that was really one of the first ones. And so I would say from my POV, it was probably the greatest success I've had in developer relations was helping to shepherd Markdown out to the internet. And he made a brilliant thing. He beta tested it with our mutual late friend, Aaron Schwartz, who had great feedback for him, and put it out in the world. And it was immediately a success. Everybody sort of saw the value of it. And then, for a couple of years, it was sort of a slow roll. And then, you go maybe 5, 6 years down the road, and it was picked up in short order, then in rapid succession by GitHub and and I'd seen the founders sort of there implement it in their as soon as they made that ability to show a README, and Stack Overflow, where I was, very close with the founding team and on the board, and saw them, especially Jeff Atwood, who was very vocal about sort of trying to standardize the way that Markdown worked on that site. And of course, those two sites also both each had their own flavors of Markdown, but particularly because everybody on Stack Overflow and everybody on GitHub were developers, since they were exposed to Markdown in the place where developers got together, they then perpetuated it, building into their own tools.
It's a fascinating journey in history of how something so simple and creative can be produced and put out there, but then also spread like wildfire everywhere. But what I was also interested in is this kind of collision with this AI moment, and I wanted to understand what the relationship between Markdown and AI is, as Anil saw it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's interesting because it's sort of the control plane for AI, and you could have the most cutting edge, advanced LLM, frontier model from $1 trillion company, and you're making a plain text markdown file to try and orchestrate it, right? And in the most low tech basic play, like you can use Windows Notepad. Well, I guess Notepad has an LLM in it these days, but like you can use, you can be in Vim and making this plain text file, and it's going to be how you control it. And I think that's a pretty extraordinary thing. I was talking to a friend the other day and saying it almost feels like what Unix pipes are, but the next layer of the stack up. It's that, pervasive, and that default a level of piping information through, of connecting through, and a default assumption. And there is one other thing that I think was really non-obvious to me at the beginning, but that has stuck with me, is in the early days, in the first several years, as a coder and a person that builds systems, it made me very itchy that it was so non-standard. I knew there were edge cases where it's like, well, you didn't tightly specify what to do with this.
Mhm.
And I was like, that's wrong. It's not technically correct.
Yeah.
And now with the hindsight of 20 plus years, I still, it makes me itchy to say this. I think that's part of why it succeeded.
Yeah.
And I hate to say that, but that is the real world. And the example I would point to that illustrates this is HTML itself, right? Which is that, and now you and I know that there is a tight specification, right? So HTML5, like post 5 era, is tightly specified. But HTML that got adopted,
Yeah.
was might as well have been scrawled on the back of an envelope, and around the same era, actually, within months of when Markdown was created, is really when RSS became what it was. Like the spec had been around and people were adopting it, but when RSS like really took off, and the way that it would be used to support podcasting and all these things that it took off, um, it was, subject to quite emotional and pointed and, very tense battles within the community by people who were like, we absolutely have to standardize it, and there needs to be a formal XML spec, and we're going to take it to ITF. And I was very much part of that community and a very big believer in it. And none of that amounted to a hill of beans.
Yeah.
Like the thing that actually worked was like, just kind of make it work. And like, we'll run some conformance tests and somebody make a little, a profile that's like kind of good enough. And that's one of those things that I think has been a really interesting lesson, and especially for me, been very instructive about how I look at community and developer relations,
Yeah.
the technical specs, and what it takes to make things succeed. And also that the bias I had towards, understandably, technical correctness and standardization also makes things easier for big companies to take over, and for capture by the people who have a budget to send somebody to a standards meeting
Mhm.
or to run a standards body, and to what becomes enshittification, and all these other things, or to being tied into a SaaS service and a subscription, and an enterprise suitability. And I'm like, maybe I don't want enterprise extensions in my spec,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because Markdown enterprise grade would have probably been a nightmare, actually.
Yeah.
And so the fact that it isn't, that it is a little bit of a toy is part of why it's so good. And so that was a real, that's a difference between what I thought then and what I know now
Yeah.
with, half my life has passed.
There's a lot of wisdom in there, a lot of, I think, things we can learn from as we build other standards and cultivate new standards and grow the ones that we've had for a while and kind of make them work together. But I wanted to understand more what is an optimal kind of ecosystem for this growth when it comes to open source, commercial interests, and community. How does it work, and what he learned from the journey with Markdown.
We go through these expansion contraction cycles, and I've seen that go through so many times. So in the same company, there's a company called Six Apart that we made at CMS Movable Type in. Later on, we acquired LiveJournal, which was one of the first social networks, and they did so much pioneering work. They made Memcache, and in the room with these guys, these folks, we created the first versions of OpenID and worked with teams to make OAuth and OEmbed and other things. And the first versions were, Markdown style. Like I could implement them even as a lousy coder.
Mm-hmm.
And then they all kind of got enterprised up. And at the time, as a DevRel, DevX kind of person, I was so excited. Like, oh, Microsoft's on board. Awesome.
Yeah.
you know? And
Yeah.
then you got to the version that was enterprise grade, and IBM was on board. And what I thought was validation made it impossible to implement. All of a sudden, I was like, what do you, like, I don't understand this.
Yeah.
I can't now. What I used to be able to hack together by viewing source is going to take me all weekend just to get it running. And none of this has to do with my actual app,
Yeah.
and that was really humbling about what I thought mattered, and what am I really trying to achieve here, and how much of it was ego about me wanting to have a thing on my resume and later my LinkedIn that said created standard that was adopted by
Mm-hmm.
insert billion-dollar company name here,
Yeah.
versus what I really care about, which was, here's the thing all these people use that they make real
Yeah.
things with.
Yeah.
And that's a thing that only, it does come with experience and does come with, what do you really care about? What do you value? And also, one of the reasons I wrote this piece about Markdown very unapologetically was to remember, my friend Aaron Schwartz,
Yeah.
and to have it be the real version of him. He was an activist, very much so, and proudly so. But one of the double, edged parts of that is that since he passed when he was very young, there's sort of been a mythology that sprung up around him, and people will put, this sort of halo exalted. And he was a wonderful person and had great values, but it makes it a little less real version of him. And so I wanted to give a little bit of the sort of funnier and pricklier and whatever version of him. And so, and even John too, John's been a friend for, again, 25 years now. And to, if somebody, I think Hacker News or something was kind of like, I'd open the piece by mentioning like he's a he's a friend of, I think it's at a indefensible sports team, and they were like, why does he say this terrible thing about this guy? And I'm like, you got to be able to like poke your friend, like it's kind of like you're just busting his chop. And I think they just didn't realize, like, these are people.
Mm-hmm.
This is somebody I text to ask how his kid is doing. This is like, it's real life. And I think people have not understood that the entire internet is made of like regular people who, in between, going out for beers together, or did you plant your seeds for your garden this spring yet,
Mm-hmm.
are viewing source and copying and pasting. And that's what it is. That's how it was made, and that's how it could be made again.
I love these organic kind of accidental happy accidents of standards and specifications that happen, because I think they start with trying to solve a problem, and then they kind of spread intentionally but unintentionally and grow in different ways. And I think there's a lot we can learn from Markdown, and its simplicity, its kind of roughness. There's a lot to it that I think we need to think about when we evolve other standards, and definitely embrace Markdown as part of whatever new standard you're producing. It's one of those cross-cutting standards that matter a lot. All right. Well, I think that's it for the Capabilities podcast today. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time. Hey, I want to talk about my Naftiko Signals program. I'm looking for design partners who have integration, governance, and other issues when it comes to API reusability, as well as context engineering. So how do you take those APIs and spin them into the MCP servers and other things you're going to need to plug in and integrate AI into the enterprise? And then anything to do with the automation, the agentic, anything around that. So those are the top 3 use cases I'm looking to talk to folks on, and I'm studying how different enterprises are tackling this. And I would love to talk to you if you've got the time. So reach out. Easy to find on LinkedIn and Blue Sky. And then you can just ping me at kinlane@naftiko.io. All right. Thanks.